I think as a podcaster or content creator, you got to really look at what is the value, like time, right? I think you have to evaluate personally what works for you and what's valuable as far as your time and energy is.
What's going on, folks? Thanks for checking out Toys and Tech of the Trade. A little different this episode. I'm joined by two guests, Matt, who you know from Nerd News Today, and Corey from the Black Podcasters Association, who collaborated with us recently on the event that we held in Queens, New York, and we shared that in a previous episode. They're joining us as we are recording on location at the Landing 251, which is an office space here in Long Island, New York. The owner was kind enough to let us use his space, and hopefully we'll be doing a lot more recording here. Big shout out to Jim for letting us come here and deliver this week's episode. Guys, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate it. Matt, as many of you know, has been killing it with Nerd News Today, which is currently on summer hiatus. But first and foremost, when are you coming back so we can let them know?
Nerd News Today over on youtube.com/Nerd News Today has been super busy this summer. Actually, it's been nonstop. We had way too many toys this summer to look at. But my podcast, Trek Untold, that's been on a little bit of a summer hiatus. That should be coming back in the next 2 or 3 weeks. With the actors' strike going on, the actors and writers' strike in Hollywood, things have kind of slowed down. But the good news is I recorded a ton of stuff before any of that was even happening. So I've got a lot of episodes ready in the dock, waiting to go. And there's some real interesting ones this season. So good stuff coming up.
I'm very excited for it, obviously. Trek Untold is part of the Rageworks podcast network. Mag and I have worked on a ton of great projects together. And Corey and I have collaborated on quite a few. Corey runs the Black Podcasters Association, just coming off a big event that he did earlier in the summer in Brooklyn. And I wanted to bring him on board to obviously catch up with him, but to ask him, how was it just running that event now, your second event? Larger scale, full sponsorships. It was tremendous.
I just want to say shout out to all the event planners out there and the people who enjoy putting events together, because it was, I learned something about myself as a person, and I realized I didn't like it, but it was a good experience. You know, this year we had sponsors. Last year everything came out of my pocket, so that was a whole different experience of trying to get everybody on the same page, figure out what the sponsors need so I can provide that for them in return for the money that they put up. But it was a much bigger, better experience than we did last year. So I was really proud, and, you know, thank you and everybody else who came out and supported, because it wound up being way better than I ever expected it to be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the coolest aspects, and I'll share it with the audience, was that they had a listening party, a silent listening party for The Cube. Anna Deshawn was there. She was the keynote speaker at Corey's event, and I had never seen a silent listening party before, and it was probably one of the coolest things ever. Everybody got wireless headphones, and all of the audio was piped in, and it was probably one of the coolest things I've ever seen. As somebody who's seen people deal with sensory issues and things like that, I appreciated the fact that that was such a great way to cater to an audience that has that. But more importantly, it was also good because even though you were doing that in a big space and you had music and everything else, it was not detrimental to the surrounding area or the neighbors. So that was tremendous, and I thought that was just very, very forward thinking.
And it kept the podcast listening part still personal, right? Like, you know, podcasting is a very intimate thing. So even though you're in a room full of people, it was still very intimate to each individual listener. So like a lot of the pictures that I got, you just see everybody like, you know, like in deep thought listening to the content. So I used to make fun of people at a silent party because it was just a weird concept to me. And then actually being a part of it, I was like, I could see why people like it now.
Yeah, I think that from a party perspective, it's a little different, exactly that, because it seems strange. But from a podcasting perspective, I think that it's something that more and more podcast community should look into, because I think it's just a great way to do that with minimal overhead. And more importantly, it keeps the focus on what we're here for first and foremost. Even though we are doing video and we're doing all the bells and whistles, podcasting is still an audio medium. And I wanted to ask Matt about that, because doing Trek Untold and talking to so many different people, you've had the chance to interact with people that just have been in front of a camera all their lives, and now you're just like, hey, just dial up on Zoom and let's record an episode. How's that been in terms of just your approach, especially you being a filmmaker first and foremost?
I think the one thing I've learned, and this also came from like doing documentary film work especially, is like every guest is going to be different. And every guest in turn is going to have different needs for what they want and how to be talked to. So I think that's been like one of the biggest things that I've learned since I started doing the Trek Untold podcast is the art of having a conversation. Because it's one thing to, like, for example, I know there's probably a lot of solo podcasters out there who are going to be, talking to themselves for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever they do. But when you get somebody, whether it's next to you like we're doing today or virtually over Zoom, it's a very different thing because every single person I talk to is going to want to be spoken to in a different way, and they're going to want to be interacted with in a different way to engage them. Like, I've had some guests who they kind of just know the stories they want to tell in advance. My questions kind of mean nothing to them. So they will more or less hijack the interview, and they'll tell their stories that they tell at every Comic-Con or whatever, and that's what they want to do. Some are there to sell their products or whatever they want to do. In some cases, though, they really want to talk, and then it's a matter of like finding out how to get them to talk and then how to get them to open up into the next level, because that's what I kind of like to do with the podcast is not just focus on the professional part, but we're all about the personal part and figuring out how the personal part went into their professional lives. So it's then kind of the key of digging deep into their psyche, into their soul, and learning more about them through that way, getting the internal to understand the external. And so how you do that, again, different for every single person. There might be like a certain memory that they have that triggers something, or like a certain thought that has them like thinking about something a little bit differently. I can think of some folks who live very public lives, like my episode with Sachi Parker. That was like one of the ones where I still get a lot of comments on to this day. There's a lot of talk about that one because we basically started talking about her relationship with her mom, Shirley MacLaine. And that became like the majority of the interview. And I mean, that was, I think, the first Trek Untold where I had a guest cry on camera for me. But we dug deep, and a big part of doing that, again, it's the art of the conversation. It's figuring out what they want to do, and then also creating trust. And it's the same when you're doing documentary film, especially like you need to create a level of trust between yourself and the person on the other side of that screen so that they want to tell you their entire life story. So that's been like the biggest takeaway, and it's still a learning experience because, again, every single guest is going to be different. So that's kind of the biggest takeaway is I've learned how to communicate, I think, better with people, which is pretty important skill to have in life.
How has and I want to say this to both you and Corey, how has the pandemic and the leaning towards virtual changed how you guys produce your content? Do you feel that it's become stronger because people now have been in front of their cameras, in front of their microphones more so? And especially in your case with guests and creating content, do you feel that now guests, since they've been doing it for so long, are more comfortable?
It's funny because like I started Trek Untold pretty much in the early days of the pandemic. I'd already been doing YouTubing and stuff for a long time.
Yep.
And I'd done some interviews over Skype here and there, and that was like, a novel concept pre-COVID. Can you believe that? Can you believe a time when like that was new? And yeah, so, then a few months into I started doing Zoom and doing more video interviews that I also would put up on the YouTube channel. So a lot of folks were definitely weirded out by it, but I was also surprised how many of them were like more acutely aware of it too. Because like I mentioned, I was using Skype predominantly, and Skype was the standard until COVID.
That's
right. All of a sudden, everybody's now using Zoom. I was in the early days like unsure if I wanted to use it because I was also like really focused on just audio. I wasn't really thinking. I was trying to make my life easier. Honestly, I was trying to not do video and audio, and make myself have to do more work. No, turns out I should have said video from day one. But so many of my guests were like, "Oh, I don't have Skype. I only use Zoom." So I'm the one who actually had to transition over. For the most part, they were okay with Zoom because at that point they were using it. That didn't really matter what field they were in. Because, a lot of actors now have to do auditions via Zoom, or they have to do a lot more self-tapes than they would have done a few years earlier. But they were getting used to it because that's how they saw their friends now. That's how they saw their family members. They had to use Zoom. They were more used to it than I was.
That's crazy.
Right? Yeah, it shouldn't have been that way, but go figure. So I think for me, it was a bigger change. But, it's honestly a welcome one because it's given me so much more access I wouldn't have had previously. Back when I was doing the Fight Nerd days, I would have to, hold my cell phone up to a recorder. And that's how I was doing my bootleg audio interviews. So now I can actually do it with proper sound and all that stuff. So I feel like for me, it's, without it, I really wouldn't even have a show.
What about you, Corey?
I think for me, because I'm an audio guy, so it was a transition for myself to adopt the video component. I still consider myself a podcast purist, right? Because I always say, well, you got a camera, it's now a talk show. But when interacting with people, I was kind of like Matt. They were more ready to go. They were like, "Do I do videos? Can I do video? Can I do video?" I'm like, "Well, let's examine this. Let's start learning more." And then as the data start coming out, showing more people are starting to blend and see podcasting as both audio and video, you know, I was like, you know what, I got to just join the party and really start understanding how this works and provide customers with what they're looking for, right? Because my first iteration of my studio, I didn't have any cameras. So now I went out and, you know, brought some cameras, and it's like, okay, I don't want to leave money on the table because people are asking for it. And so I think I lost some clients because of that, because they wanted the video component. So I think people now, after the post-pandemic, they're like more, some people just know more about cameras and videos than I do. And I thought I'm learning a lot just, you know, my own learning. So I think they come prepared. I think they're ready for it. I think some people have delusions of grandeur about it, but and that's where we come in. Let's sit down and like, okay, let's figure this out. Because like you, Matt, I didn't want to make more work for myself.
Right.
And I always tell people like the production value, you know, production goes up once you start adding the camera. So let's have a genuine conversation about it, because there's a lot of people who don't have the budgets, they don't have the money, and you know, and the stuff that's required for video. So I think that's where we're at now with a lot of podcasters. It's just, we need to have those conversations versus like, are you going to do video or do you want to do video? It's like, okay, you want to do video. Well, what do you know, where are you at with your budget? How do we figure out how to make this work for you?
I think on top of that, just to kind of add on to Corey's point, is like, you use the term budget, and that's a perfect term, because a lot of folks who are, let's say, you know, there's a lot of COVID podcasts now. A lot of folks started podcasts right as soon as the COVID pandemic began, right? So they're thinking money and budget, but budget also means like energy and time, right, Corey? I mean, because now, like you said, you're now suddenly doing video, you have to now think about that. You now have to have a camera in front of you. You have to think about all these other things. If you're using a live switcher or doing shows, I mean, it's like all these other components now. And there's more video editing. There's now, if you're going to make social clips, you know, shorts, things like that with video. So there's now not just the money aspect, it's now budgeting your time and your own energy to do that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
I think that's to Corey's sentiment. I'm still stuck in audio mode. Matt and I have worked together on numerous video things, and my audio-ness shines through very much. And the problem is, in the 16 years I've done this, I transitioned to video at one point when I was doing My Take Radio, and video was great. It was good, the live streaming, but to that point, just more aggravations. Oh, the camera's not going to work, or the audio's not in sync, and the thing about it was, I just didn't want to keep doing that. And the funny thing was, I stopped it, and now video's the driving force of everything. But I do want to say this to everybody who watches this, is that I'm an audio purist, because at the end of the day, you can listen to an audio podcast anywhere. Versus video, you have to either have YouTube. You can't watch a video podcast in your car. You can't watch a video podcast.
We don't recommend it.
We don't recommend it. Let's be honest. We don't recommend it. And I think that's the problem that has kept me so reliant on pushing audio first, because I tell people when they start out, I tell them, I'm like, you're someone's training partner, you're someone's co-pilot, you're someone's drive to work, you're someone's confidant, and that's only delivered through the power of audio. I mean, we grew up, you know, I'm an 80s baby, and most of us are similar in age, and we didn't have the audio drama like our parents did, our grandparents did. And think about it, you know, they'd play an episode of Superman on the radio, and you'd have to be like, there he is, and he's breaking through the wall, and all this stuff, and you would have to literally close your eyes and feel that emotion. And I think with audio, especially when you're storytelling, if somebody's listening to a podcast before they go to sleep and you're doing a podcast and you're describing something, I just feel that still has more power versus the reliance on, oh, look, you know, here's the video and it's 4K. We spend too much time trying to make it pretty instead of making quality content.
It leaves things to the imagination. I mean, when you talk about the radio, right, Water Worlds, right, the effect that it had when it first aired on, you know, and threw everybody off, like, it took, I forgot who did, was it, who did this Worlds? Yes, thank you. But, you know, it took him being able to tell that story to make it so believable that people, you know, were going crazy, or, you know, and thought it was real. So that just shows you power. I forgot who the director was, because in my Facebook group, we used to have these debates of like audio versus content, video, and all that stuff. And I was like, you know what, let me look up, like, let me see if what directors say about audio. And I can't remember who it was. I found some quotes about audio, and they were saying like a movie, it's nothing without the audio. I saw Oppenheimer for like the 5th time last night, and this time I was like paying attention to the movie, not the, you know, like how they did it and the scenes and everything. And I think there was rarely a scene in the whole entire movie without any music, or, you know. So audio is a big important. It's very important. Like you said, people are still listening to podcasts when they're doing things that they can't focus. Like I don't like watching videos like tutorials and stuff because I don't get work done. It's distracting. So I think, you got to find that balance. And when you're talking about podcasting, I talk to people like, let's go audio first. One, it's cheaper. But two, your video is also, how do we monetize it? Do you want to put it out there on YouTube or one of those platforms and just give it to people free? Is it some exclusive content you can give people? And I think when you're thinking about doing a podcast, you have to have those conversations and really flesh out what is your audio strategy, what is your video strategy.
One of the scary parts for a lot of people, and we've all gone through this, is that we spend a lot of time trying to make it pretty. And instead of making it pretty, we should just press record and do it. Because I think at the end of the day, we're going to grow into perfection. I remember, and Matt can attest to this, have you ever gone back and listened to your first Trek Untold?
That's me shivering right now. No, thank you. It's embarrassing to even think about that now because it's a totally different person doing that interview back then.
Right, but if you go back and you listen to it and you see how much growth came from that, Trek Untold is in triple digits episode-wise at this point. And even now, there are days when I work with Matt and I listen to Trek Untold and I tell him, like, wow, this was amazing. This was stellar storytelling. This guest was great. And we're still learning. Even though we have decades of experience between the three of us, we're still learning. And, I wanted to ask both of you, what was the last part of this that said, man, I'm still learning? What was the last moment that you worked on one of your projects and you're like, man, I'm still learning?
I mean, it could even be the most recent one because really, like, every time I try nowadays to, like, really see what I can do to improve it, because the way I tend to work also is, like, I'm usually recording in bulk, editing in bulk, but I'm also trying to figure out what I can do differently each time and each season as well. I try to make some kind of changes. So, like, I know for me, one of my things has been trying to figure out, where do I lose people from listening to me? Where do I lose people? Where do they stop watching? How do I keep them watching? How do I, put myself to a better position to try to monetize the show in some other ways? So there's been a lot of that. Like, I know one of the changes I've been doing, even just a few episodes ago, was changing my intro completely. And then I also changed the literal intro from when I cut to myself talking, introducing the guest with just my solo shot, to now me talking to the guest. I used to have this whole big thing. Now change it, just get right to the conversation, make it a little more casual, make it more entry level. I think the biggest thing for me is I've been removing the formality. So it really is just like every time trying to do something different, whether that's changing how I edit a video clip or how I integrate a photo into it, or just like little things like that. That's kind of, I think, the way that folks should kind of do it, is each time you do it, get it done, whatever it is, it is that. It's not a sacred beast, just move on from it. And then the next one you do, be like, okay, I did this last time, maybe it didn't work as well, or I want to try this differently, I will do it here today. So that's kind of the way I tackle it. I think every single episode is like, I hate this, what's this horrible, I hate this, but I'm going to try and fix at least this one little thing, and maybe that'll be better next time.
How has the audience reacted as you've made these changes? Because you changed your intro, you changed your music, your transitions have been different. There's been a lot of adjustments over the last 100+ episodes that you've done. How are you getting audience feedback? How does that work? How are you gauging what's working?
My show, because it's like interview-based and very evergreen content, it's very different how my audience interacts, honestly. Like, it's not like I'm talking every week about the latest episode of Star Trek on it. I don't really do that. I've done a little bit here and there, but even then, the show is still guest-centric. Like, when I was covering Strange New Worlds a little bit, I had interviews with Paul Wesley, I had interviews with Melissa Navia and other folks, so I still wasn't getting folks in there talking about the latest episode. We're talking about what the guest is saying. So there's been some feedback. I think the biggest feedback was honestly when I changed the music. That was the most controversial choice. Because, like, here's the thing with the Star Trek podcasts out there is, like, they all use the exact same intro theme. Because there's just, like, one copyright-free song out there that sounds like a Star Trek theme. So I remember listening to other folks' shows, so I'm friends with even. I'm like, that's my song. That's my song. It's like 4 or 5 podcasts, and I'm listening to it in a row with the exact same copyright-free song. So that was the point where I was like, okay, that has to change, because if everybody keeps hearing that in the same show, it just sounds bad. So I did the foolish, crazy thing of going into GarageBand and making my own music, which I used to do.
You brother show yourself?
That's me. Yeah, I did that.
Man.
Yeah, I did that. I pulled bits, because I have a little bit of experience with GarageBand from years ago, because I used to do my own music for the Fight Nerd YouTube channel. Because back then, even then, you couldn't really easily find license-free music, or if you found stock music, copyrights and that kind of stuff, it's a load of nonsense. I mean, I know, like, a lot of folks out there, pro tip, For folks who might use things like story blocks or audio blocks, they give you a licensing form, but that's not going to cover you. If someone leaves that platform and they take their music elsewhere, or they just take it back to themselves, they don't care anymore that you had this license for that time period because they own it now. So that's why I just was like, I'm going to my business for myself here. So since the Fight Nerd days, I learned how to make my own music. And then for a while, I was just using YouTube's library because YouTube, years into this, finally started having a catalog of stuff that like they owned. So it's like copyright free in perpetuity for now. But even then, it's like, as far as like sci-fi sounding things for what I do and for my niche, I was like, everyone's using the exact same thing. I need to stand out differently. So I made the whole new song for myself, using GarageBand as a tool, using Star Trek sound effects and other sound effects. And the first time that episode happened, everybody's like, what is this? And they were very confused because I went from having this thing that sounds like this orchestral Star Trek theme to this like Philip Glass art house sci-fi beat. It's like, I mean, people who like it. It took some time. They had to grow on it. They're like, okay, now I don't hate this as much, but it was a pretty drastic change to go from one to the other. So honestly, that's been the only other change. I think for the most part, people have just been like, they get into it and they kind of get into a flow of it. So I don't even think they notice the changes. And that's kind of a good thing. Like the only most drastic thing has been that theme song.
That's crazy. You know what's funny? Corey is music producer by trade, so he knows all about the fun aspects of making beats. I've seen when he posts like, "Hey, I'm working on this beat," and I want to ask you obviously about the same thing that with Matt. Like, what is something that you're still learning, but also you're still creating, like you're making music, you're still doing it. Are you integrating that into your podcast also?
Music is always going to be my first love. That's what when I was a kid, I was trying to, that's how I got into like the recording, because I was always in the studio and I realized I wanted to be behind the boards, not in front of the mic. So, I went to school for some of that stuff. Didn't do well, but I went to school for it. So, I'm always learning. I'm like a little kid, like, Glengarry Ross has that line, always be selling. I just took it and said, always be learning. So I always challenge myself. Just in this conversation, I could say I'm learning something new, right? So I'm just always learning. I think also instinctively, I'm an engineer. That's the way my brain works, right? I do programming, so I'm always like want to understand how something works. So that's why like last night I was in the movies. I'm hitting start. I'm timing each scene, trying to see if there's a pattern and all that stuff. Because of that, I'm always just like looking for the next thing to learn. It drives me a little nuts sometimes because you got to learn it and also understand it. So I've had to learn how to slow myself down. But in this space, it's always something to learn, right? Right now, my thing is lighting, understanding lighting better, right? Soft boxes and I have LED lights, and I'm always playing around with my lighting at home, because one time I got on a live stream and somebody was like, "Ooh, he's so bright." So I was like, what? Or the other time when I'm on my live stream and I had no lights in the background, and because I'm so light-skinned, everything is black, somebody said I look like the Headless Horseman. So I was like, you know what? It's time for me to really take some time and learn this stuff. So there's so many moving components. Like, how could you not want to learn, right? And the video portion, I'm still trying to learn to understand like lenses and all that, and all, but it's challenging to me. And I think that's for me why I like it, because it's always a new challenge. You go into a new environment. Okay, we have reverb. How do we deal with that? How do we solve that problem? And I think that's the part, every person that I meet has we're doing podcasting, we're doing video, all that stuff, but everybody has a unique problem you're trying to help them solve. So for me, it's always like, it never turns off. That's why sometimes I don't get no sleep, because I'm laying in my bed like, or something pops in and like, oh, I didn't realize that. And I'm trying to figure out right now how to integrate my music, because I don't want to pay, like a lot of those licensing agreements, for instance, I have a couple of services. Yeah, they give you the license to use it on your YouTube and live streams and all that stuff and commercially. But if you get rid of that product, it's it's not even, it's you become muted. They put the DSCMA claim against you. You can mess with your monetization. It can mess with your channel. So it's like, well, what's the best way? And I was like, well, I always tell people, like, if you have a friend who does music, give them $200, give them $150 and make sure you put in paper. It's work for hire. Don't even, I hate to say it like this, but take the credit, because then you won't have any issues if anybody says you put the copyright in your name. It's work for hire. If you have to get a contract, then get a contract, but pay that person for their work. And if you want to give them credit, as the owner of it, that's entirely up to you. But that's how you protect yourself, and then your evergreen content doesn't get flagged if you decide to move from a different. Otherwise, you got to go into all that content, re-edit, remove if you can, and it's just not worth the headache. So I'm trying to figure out how to use the music I make into the stuff that the projects I plan on working on, if it works, because how I hear music and how the feelings I have from it may not even fit what I'm trying to do. So, but I have friends, so I will be making phone calls and, hey, I got a job for you.
That's very important, and I'm glad you touched on that. I think that's something that a lot of creators don't realize, that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the thing about it is, we pay these services, we get this music, and yeah, it's great, but it's exactly that. What if you don't pay it that year? Or what if you move to something else because the catalog is trash? Now all of a sudden you have hours upon hours upon hours upon hours of music that you can never use again. And I'm glad you touched on it, and Matt did as well, because I think that that's the problem as creators. We're trying to we're trying to get the white whale, and we're using every tool at our disposal to try to do it. And most of those tools are built in someone's backyard, and they're never ours.
Yeah,
I think that's a tough sell.
Well, I got a little trick that I do. I get lifetime deals.
I agree. Lifetime deals for
So some of the music ones that I have lifetime deals with them. So, I mean, unless the company goes under or for whatever reason they don't honor it anymore, I don't have to worry about that, about having to pay somebody every year or every month.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime I'll need something, I may not like everything they have in their catalog, but I will go back to it and say, let me just throw this in there because I have a lifetime deal.
Yep, I have one of
I
those.
don't have those concerns. So this, I don't know on this, but there's websites out there you can get in, like with people who launch products, you can get a lifetime deal as they're trying to build their user base, and and as they grow, you still have that deal with them, so you grow along with them.
Get those grandfather deals.
Yeah, I didn't know if I could name drop, but AppSumo.
No,
AppSumo is one of my addictions.
AppSumo gets a name drop. I've sent Matt quite a few links. I'll be like, hey, there's this.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think that when we are creating, and especially in spaces like this, like right now, we're on location creating. And the thing about it is that on location, lifetime deals don't matter, because guess what? We have to have good equipment. But when we go home and have to edit, we have to rely on the things that are important, and those lifetime deals, those services, that's where they come in handy.
Yeah.
The music and that stuff it doesn't. And I wanted to kind of circle back on that. When we all go home now and we edit, how much are you relying on products and services to get your final products out there? Like, I know that Matt, before we started recording, was talking about he's no longer using Final Cut. And Corey was saying he does. I use whatever works. I mean, I use Filmora. I use Premiere. Like, Matt's been incredibly gracious to teach this ogre Premiere, and he's done all right.
Learn your keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah. So keyboard shortcuts and things like that. But I wanna ask both of you, how does your workflow change now with so many products and services? Like, I'll start with Corey. Like, in your case, how is that adjusted now for you? Because think about it, there's a new tool like every day now.
This whole subscription service thing, like when TV, right? We were supposed to, all these apps, we were supposed to cut cable. And I just had this conversation with my mom. She's like, I got YouTube TV, we got rid of the cable, and we have all these other apps that we're paying for. She was like, but it's costing us more now. I like the access it gives me, but when you start thinking about it, it's a lot. I literally this week was like, I ended my Zoom subscription and my Calendly subscription. Why? Because I'm paying for Google Suite. That gives me that already. I kept Zoom because I know a lot of people use Zoom. And I'm like, no, you know what? Come over here to Google Meet, because that's what I'm using. That's where you're going to meet me at. Because I'm paying for it and I'm not using it. And then the deal I have on my subscription, I actually get more people in my meeting than I do on my Zoom. So I was like, well, I'm paying all this money every year. Well, it's not a lot of money, but I'm paying this money every year for a tool I'm not using.
That's good.
I went on AppSumo and got their calendar app.
Tidy cow.
$29 lifetime versus me paying $150 a year to do the same thing. So I think when I've been really evaluating all the tools that I'm using, and I'm like, where's the value and how much does it cost? I'm running a business, so I got to always be like looking at, what I'm bringing in versus what I'm putting out. And I mean, it's a slow period right now for the business. So now I'm evaluating what I'm putting out, right? I think as a podcaster or content creator, you got to really look at what is the value, like time, right? It may be out of your budget, but will this service, instead of you having to hire an editor or learn how to edit, where you might not even be like myself, like I learned how to edit, but I'm not a big fan of it. It's fun at times, but I'm just not. I'd rather record. That's where my love is at. Or do I use an AI service that I pay to $30 a month for? And for me, it's like, well, I can knock out X amount of video. You know, the 1-2 hours it takes for me to try to figure out how my short keys, my keyword keys and stuff to speed up the workflow. It's like, well, I can go to this service over here and just run it through there, and it's pretty good at picking the clips. So I think you have to evaluate personally what works for you and what's valuable as far as your time and energy is. I also think people, just like we see with equipment, I think people go too far. They see what somebody else is doing. They think that because this person's using it or pitching it to you, because you guys watch out for those affiliates, because a lot of times that's what people are doing. They're just pitching affiliate links. They might not even be using the service, but somebody might be pitching this and you're like, oh, this is what they're using for their success, and it may not be right for you. 100%. So don't what does he call it? He calls it gear acquisition syndrome, right?
Yep.
Like we was in the store, I was like, man, I don't want to go in there. I'm gonna want to walk. I'm gonna spend some money. It's hard, right? It's like, oh, I need a hard drive. Like all of a sudden you start rationalizing things, and then you're spending $100, $200, and you're like, could have saved that money or used it for something better. So I think for people, and myself included at times, I tell you, AppSumo, I'm addicted to it, and they know exactly what email to send me. Cause I'm like, this is what I've been needing this, but I already have it with somebody else. So I think you just gotta learn, know who you are, but be careful, because that stuff adds up. It adds up a lot. And being a programmer, I know that these companies know the psychological aspect, and that's why, that's why it works for them.
What about you, Matt?
I mean, I know you're big on the AppSumo stuff, because I know you're sending me links all the time for things, but a lot of that, it's like you'll send me something and I'll be like, I already can do this on my own with this. So like, I don't want to have someone else doing it for me when I can just do it myself. And not everybody can do that, because it is kind of like a privilege to be able to do that. Like, full time, what I do is editing and producing. So like, this is my area. So that's why like I can center in. I don't need to like buy another app with a lifetime subscription deal, because I just know how to do it already. And if I don't, I'll figure it out. So like, it's energy again. It's the budgeting of energy and your time to do these kinds of things. So I might be like a different position than most folks, because it's what I do. So like, I am the kind of person who's like, why pay for it when I can do it myself, or learn to do it for myself, even if it is going to give myself a ton more stress. There's definitely a time and place to like, throw up the white flag and be like, all right, so I guess I do need to spend this money. But it's also like learning the tools. Because like, for example, there's tons of different things you can buy for Premiere, whether it's a plugin or whatever it is, LUT filters, that kind of stuff. It's plentiful on YouTube. There's always someone
doing what?
Yes, there's always the LUT shilling. But even beyond that, there's all sorts of apps that'll make your social videos. So they'll do this for you, or they'll do that for you. And then there's the folks who, like you were saying, there's like so many subscriptions for things. Whereas, for me, I use Adobe products, and you got to pay for that monthly. With Final Cut, you get it once, it's there forever. But the thing with the Adobe stuff is like, this is maybe a way other folks to think about it, is if you get the all-in suite right now, it's like $60 a month, right? That is money. That's a pretty substantial amount. But if you're in a position where you're making money off of your show, it's only $60. For me, if I'm doing an editing gig, I make that money back in like an hour. So it pays for itself, because I'm using it. I'm keeping my skills sharp. So it's not like it's an investment in what I'm doing. So that's kind of how I look at Adobe, because it also is like, I can now use all the different parts of the Adobe suite in my Premiere, because it's compatible with Photoshop, it's compatible with Illustrator, all these different things, After Effects. They seamlessly integrate, which is amazing as a time saver also. It just is a matter of, are you going to take the time to learn it? And not everybody's going to do what I do professionally, so what I do is different. But I kind of think like, I'm of the mindset where if I go to a gig, for example, and I'm doing editing, I can't necessarily bring a hard drive full of my stuff with me. I got to have everything ready. I got to know how just the standards work. A lot of editors do bring like a flash drive, and they'll have all their custom keyboard shortcuts and all the things with them. But I don't want to work that way. I don't want to function that way. I want to have whatever that is that I'm going to work at in a new place. That's what's there for me. And I'll adapt to whatever else that they have that I don't have. So for me, it's just time and energy, but I'm okay kind of putting that in there.
Okay.
And suffer a little bit, but yeah.
See, for me, I keep my toes in two worlds. I like products that give me something that I can't get back, and that's time. I'd rather spend the dollar because I'll get the dollar back to Matt's sentiment. But to the same thing with Corey, it's like time. Like Matt knows and he can vouch for this. I've messaged him like, I got to do this video thing and it'll take him 5 minutes. It'll take me 4 hours. And that's where we work off of each other. Or he'll have an audio problem. He'll be like, take a look at this. Let me know what you think. It'll take him an hour. It might take me 5 minutes. And I think that that's the big thing with all of us as creators. And I tell people this all the time, weigh out your options on which part you're willing to sacrifice to see this through. Are you going to sacrifice money or are you going to sacrifice time? But don't sacrifice both.
But I will say on that, though, on that point, I think we both have been more expedient in these things. So that's also, like we're sharing information. And I think that's one of the big things that anyone doing content creation needs to do is to be able to reach out to people within their community and be like, hey, how do I do this? But also not necessarily to have them do it for you, because I think we've both been learning. I mean, a lot of the audio issues I used to come to you with, I now know how to do. I figured out how to do Premiere because I'm like, all right, well, Rich made it sound this way. How do I replicate that?
Yep.
And how do I do it with the tools that I have? And I think you've done similar. So I think there's a lot of the information sharing that's a big part of this, which is probably one of the hardest things I think about podcasting is actually creating a network, an internal network of, folks you trust who you could go to for help and figuring all these things out.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because Corey is a sound professional.
I was about to segue and be like, well, that's why you got to join a community. The whole time I sit there, I'm like, yeah, community.
I'll take my check now, please.
You either got to, and I think for a lot of podcasters, when I meet them, especially those who are like starting intermediate beginner level, it's a hard concept for them to understand because they think everything is associated with money. And I'm like, well, no, there's Facebook groups, there's paid communities like mine, where there's like-minded people that you can either barter with, trade with, or that are just, because you're in the community, they're more willing to, we have Emmy Award winners, we have producers that have shows on TV and stuff in my community, but they will normally charge you for a lot of them, consulting is part of their business, but you're getting it here, you just put in do this, do that, I think that's the joy of having a community, and you don't need to, initially you might wear all the hats, for this, and because you can't hire people, whatever, that's just the natural order of things. But at some point you gotta let your pride go and say, Rich is an audio guy. I don't really like audio. Let me go talk to him. Let me pick his brains. I think one of the things I love about my community is it's like when you like a parent finds out their child is doing something in secret, and you're like, oh, I didn't know you was doing that. Like, and I'm not saying this, I look at my community that way, but it was like, we was having a conversation one time. So I was like, yeah, I'm over here interning with this person. And I'm like, what? And this other person's like, yeah, we're working on this project. And I'm like, so you guys are doing stuff behind the scenes now. But that was the point of the community. And people like, this guy, one of my members, he's just been on a hot streak. He's just getting awards. So to hear him saying, I'm over here interning so he could learn more was like, wow. So I think if you're looking to get into podcasting, you have to build your network. I mean, what do they say? Your network is your net worth, right? So
that's right.
And it's true, especially in the content creation space. Your network is your net worth, because somebody might say, hey, come get on this project with me.
Right.
And next thing you know, I've had people introduce me to people at companies that make the decisions on sponsorships and stuff now. So it's like, you gotta build your team. You gotta go out there, ask questions. Don't be afraid. And if you're weak in one space, ask somebody. Get cool with somebody. Don't take advantage of them. But reach out. I'm about to start reaching out to you, man, because I want to learn some more about this video stuff.
There you go. Before we wrap our conversation, what can our audience, what can the Toys and Tech of the Trade and RageWorks audience do to help you? Matt, what can we do to help you and get you more listens, get you out there? What can we do for you?
Well, if you'd like to send me checks, money orders, or PayPal donations, really the biggest free thing that is most helpful would definitely be watching and listening to my stuff. So yeah, you can find during news today if you are looking for toy reviews and product reviews and comic stuff and a lot of stuff that's coming soon, probably early 2024. Quite honestly, I guess I'm going to be accountable and say it here out loud. So I'm making big changes to the site, and I want to really change it up finally and make content I actually care more about. So I'm going to figure that out. So go visit youtube.com/nerdnewstoday and be patient while I figure that out. But and as far as Trek Untold, whether or not you're even a Star Trek fan, because I'm in this weird little niche, and if I can go in a little rant for a moment here, I know I'm in this weird little spot where it's a Star Trek podcast and people see it as a Star Trek podcast, but once people listen, they actually realize it's not. It's probably the most non-Star Trek podcast out there because, like I mentioned at the start of the show, the key of it is that it's very much about talking to these professionals, whether they are actors, writers, directors, or stunt performers, VFX artists, people working behind the scenes, people working way off behind the scenes doing other things. It's very much about learning about them as a person and then learning about what they do as a professional. So if you're an actor or into acting, there's people who are giving you acting theory and you're getting it for free. So that's kind of where the show is. It's more about that sort of thing. So if that sounds appealing to you, definitely check it out. I mean, we got comic book artists as well, comic book writers, we got illustrators, technical illustrators. We cover the gamut here of professions. So that's what we're talking about. So there's an episode for everybody. And so I recommend just checking out, look at the names, see if anybody's jobs interest you, basically, or see if there's a name that you recognize and just dive in, listen to it on youtube.com/@TrekUntold, or find us on pretty much every major audio platform out there and just like, listen, subscribe, thumbs up, comments, do all the things. That'd be cool. Yeah. And live long and prosper. Why not?
There you go. Corey, what can we do for you?
Well, I'm a little different because I don't have a podcast myself. It's in the works, actually. I'm working on some projects with some people and myself. I'm trying to build my own network, so I'm working on that too. But as far as like what I do, I mean, we are the Black Podcast Association, but we are also ambassadors to podcasting because people hear Black podcasters and they think it's just, you know, we're inclusive also, but also exclusive. But we actually are, a lot of our members are fans of podcasting. So it is a safe space for Black podcasters to come in, you know, for our cultural things and all that stuff. But we're not isolated and it's not be surprised at stuff that I hear, man.
It's not a walled garden.
It's not some racist or prejudiced or anything. It's just a space for a group of people actually in an industry that has a diversity issue. You know, I'm very vocal about that.
Yep.
Where they can just come together and work with each other. But if you know anybody looking for a community or, you know, that's, because anybody can join. I just want you guys to know that anybody could join. It's just know that this conversation is going on there that you might not like but you can go to Get BPA. I have a special sponsored deal going on with the Heytai app, which is it's an app for Black publishers and podcasters. It's the largest directory of Black podcasters right now. But to get up to 60 days or 2 months free membership, so you can come and learn, see what we're doing. We do monthly learning labs, which is open to anybody. That was one of the things in the beginning. I was like, I wanted to keep it exclusive to the community, but I was like, some of these people have just such great content and they're teaching stuff people. I was like, is it about the community or is it about people becoming good podcasters? So I opened it up to the general public. It is a small fee, but it's not expensive. It's free to members. But
this is to the audio version.
Yeah,
Corey winked.
Thank you. See, I gotta remember that to do that. The descriptive audio. But it's the community is great. We work with a lot of different people. So the biggest thing I could say, if you want to support us, just let people know we're out there. It's the Black Podcast Association on all socials. You can just follow us. And, you know, I'm always open to, like I said, I'm always learning. So any feedback or anything, that I think to me that's the most valuable thing you can give me is positive feedback.
Positive being the key word here. Myself, my call to action for everybody watching and listening is to continue supporting these amazing creators. Keep an eye out for everything we're doing on the RageWorks Podcast Network. Obviously, we are on location. Again, big thanks to Jim Overdorf from the Landing 251 for allowing us to record here. And you'll probably be seeing us here more often as we work on something very, very special for all of you. On behalf of myself, Corey, and Matt, thank you guys for checking out this episode of Toys and Tech of the Trade. We'll see you next time.